All right, everybody. Good morning. Happy Friday. And I think it's time we dive into another one of our top rookies. We're going to go to our other first rounder now. We're going to take a look at Jaxon Smith-Njigba in this video. And once again, we're going to be breaking things up. This first video is going to look at his numbers, look at his measurements, look at his stats, and then the next video, later today, is going to discuss more the kind of player that he is. Exactly what we're getting with JSN. So, it's going to be a little bit easier to do JSN than it was to do Witherspoon because JSN, I'll just say it, really only has one season that is worth talking about. We'll talk about a couple other seasons as well, but just understand that it's just kind of out of desire to be exhaustive. It's not because we're going to learn a heck of a lot from those two seasons because he didn't do that much. But let's talk about what we can here with JSN. He's a wide receiver, played at Ohio State. He was a Buckeye. He will be 21 years old when the season starts. And let me just say, to start things off, regardless of how I feel about these picks, it's nice to see some young players be picked with our early picks. Really nice. It's a sharp departure from what we saw with players such as L.J. Collier, and even picks that I liked, like Darrell Taylor, but you also had Dwayne Eskridge. He was an older guy. This is definitely a step in the right direction for multiple reasons. But those are the basic facts. He is 6'1", which puts him in the 37th percentile for wide receivers in the combine. Now, it is worth noting that he is a pretty pure slot receiver. So if you were to compare him to other slot receivers, he would probably be bigger than average. And similarly, in his weight, 196 pounds, that's only 36th percentile, but that's comparing him to outside receivers, the bigger guys. If you only compared him to typical slot receivers, I think he would probably be heavier than average. But there's no getting around the fact that he has very short arms and very small hands. Not that that seems to really stop him or inhibit him in any way in playing football. But his arms are 30.5 inches long, 14th percentile, and his hands are 9 inches, 20th percentile. So he's on the smaller side as far as receivers go. Again, that's muted because he is such a pure slot receiver, but that's another element that we have to talk about when it comes to JSN. Is he a pure slot receiver? Are you okay with him being a pure slot receiver? And does he need to bring more to the table at some point in order to justify being picked 20th overall? I guess you could say it all depends on your perspective. His combine measurements were decent in a couple areas. His vertical and his broad were both okay. 35-inch vert, 44th percentile for receivers. 10-foot 5-inch broad was good, 75th percentile. But the thing that makes JSN stand out are his change of direction skills. And you see that with his 3-cone, which was historically good, and his 20-yard shuttle, which is historically good. 6.57 3-cone, which is 96th percentile, one of the best 3-cones we've ever seen. And a 3.93 20-yard shuttle, 97th percentile, also one of the best we've ever seen. And that right there does a really good job of painting a picture of what Jaxon Smith-Njigba is on a football field. He doesn't have overwhelming size or athleticism or length or anything like that, but his ability to change direction is I don't know if it's historic, but it's pretty close to historic if it's not. Like, this is one of the all-time great change of direction receivers in my estimation that has come through the draft. And that shows up in the way he plays football. His first season at Ohio State was 2020. He didn't play all that much, and it seems like they didn't really have a good idea of how to use him yet. If you take a look at the way things broke out for him, it didn't seem like they really understood what they had with him yet. He played 7 games, 162 snaps, so he didn't play all that much. Got targeted 13 times, 10 catches for 49 yards. So he's like the receiver equivalent of a short yardage back, I guess. I don't know. A touchdown, had 15 yards after the catch, broke 1 tackle or made 1 tackler miss. The QB had a good QB rating when targeting him. I guess it was Justin Fields this year, if I remember correctly, but very small sample size. Also, he played more snaps out wide than he did in the slot, which tells me that either they didn't really have a great idea of what he was yet, or they just needed to get him out there in some capacity, and that's where they had room at that point in time. He was also out there for way more running plays than passing plays, which is kind of interesting, which is a pattern that would be broken very cleanly the next year. He was graded out well overall, but it's such a small sample size, I don't think you can learn a lot. The learning starts in 2021 when he became a full-time player. He played all 13 games for Ohio State, 645 snaps, and he became one of the most prolific receivers for a single season ever in college football. He got targeted 112 times, 95 catches, and almost 1,600 yards. And that 1,600 yards is, I believe, still a Big Ten record that has yet to be broken. 9 touchdowns, almost 800 of his yards, so just barely under half of his yards were after the catch. So he did a ton of damage before catching the ball, and then he did a ton of damage after catching the ball. He lost 1 fumble on the season. He, again, this isn't broken I guess broken tackles is kind of the wrong phrase to use here. It's 19 tacklers made to miss, but 19 broken tackles. He had 6 drops, and his QB rating when targeted was 141.8, so really, really strong. Now, let's keep a few things in mind here when it comes to JSN. He is on the same team as Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson. Those are his outside receivers. He is the slot receiver, and those 2 guys I just mentioned, who were both first-round picks in the upcoming draft, they both were the number 1 and the number 2 ahead of him. Not necessarily ahead of him, because JSN did get targeted, probably, generally speaking, he got targeted more than them, but that's who he was competing with for targets. And it makes you wonder, because obviously Wilson and Olave declared for the draft after this season. Where was this going to go in 2022? Where was this going to progress, given that he did all this while competing with catches with some of the best receivers in all of college football? Because obviously the next year those guys leave and you bring in a guy like a Marvin Harrison, but JSN probably gets more targets, more opportunity for catches if he actually plays the full season, right? Like, look at these insane numbers and think about who he was playing with. Almost all of his snaps were in the slot, 562. Only 80 of his snaps he was out wide. There were a couple of snaps here and there where he played like out of the backfield. And I think actually most of that was in the Rose Bowl, which was interesting. But mostly he played in the slot, which that's where he belongs. He was also out there for 414 pass plays versus 231 run plays, which, hey, makes sense to me, right? You want him out there when you're throwing the ball. His PFF grade was incredible this year. Incredible overall, incredible on passing plays. As a run blocker, I'll talk more about this in my video coming up later today, but he was actually kind of okay, 63.3, and I noticed some positive things from him blocking when I was watching some of the tape. And then 2022, he got hurt and never really got going. Played 3 games, 60 snaps, 8 targets, 4 catches, lost a fumble, 14 yards after the catch. Almost everything coming from the slot, 20 run block snaps, average run block grade. Whatever, not really going to learn anything here. So basically everything he did in 2021. Okay, see you guys later. We're going to dive a little bit more into this, but those are the JSN numbers.